Park Library this morning. What a fabulous rollout we've had this morning. Must be all organised for Christmas, I think. Just a couple of housekeeping before we start. If you have your mobile phone with you, could you just check that it's on silent, please? And if you need the bathroom, it's just directly behind us. The format for this morning is Morag is going to give a talk. She's happy to take questions through her talk, and at 12 o'clock we'll stop to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So this morning we're here for Goodbye Garden Pests. It's being presented by Morag Gamble, and Morag comes from Seed International. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Morag. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks for coming out this morning on a busy pre-Christmas morning. It's lovely to see you all. The talk, as Margaret mentioned today, is all about Goodbye Garden Pests, and really what I'm wanting to talk about is not all the individual pests, but a whole approach to how to manage your garden system in a way that you actually don't even need to do pest management. And that's really where I'm trying to come from today, which is why it's Goodbye Garden Pests. It's not so much goodbye pests, but goodbye the way we think about the pests. So I'm from a place called Crystal Waters. I know a couple of you have been there. Has anyone else heard about it? How many of you have been there, by the way? Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Did you come to my garden as well? No. No, it's all right.
I've been there for years.
Oh, okay. So Crystal Waters is a village that's designed using the principles of permaculture, and it's just about an hour and a half north of here. This is part of my garden, the bit of my garden that I look out from my veranda and kitchen window. And as you can see, it's a mixed garden. It's a polycultural garden. It's what we call a cultivated ecology. So it has a blend of herbs and flowers and fruit trees. It has perennial plants and annual plants blended. It has self-seeding plants. It has volunteer plants. And there was a question earlier as we were setting up here about how much time do I spend tending this garden, and the answer honestly is very little indeed, because the cultivated ecology in many ways looks after itself. And how I'm going to explain to you about how I look after my issue around pests is very much tied to this approach of it being a diverse garden. The diversity and how that integrates helps to manage how the whole thing flows. So for some people this might look chaotic. For me it's a wonderful diverse playground actually for my children. They love exploring out. It's kind of like an edible playground. We have little teepee trellises that they hide in amongst, and I've set up all these little edges here so that they can either walk along them as balance beams or sit there with their little pots and pans and make up brews and do all sorts of things. I have 3 young children, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and they help me very much in looking after this, and they go out and they identify things going on and come back and report, which is fantastic. So for me, a lot about this idea of having a chemical-free garden and not using sprays and any poisons in the garden is actually about creating a safe space for the children. And not just them, but for all of us, because I was doing some research recently about cherries, actually, because being Christmas season and being cherry season, I found, actually my daughter, she's now 9, she was doing some research the other day and she found this website about how many chemicals are in your foods. I think it's what'sinmyfood.com. It's this website you can look up and you can type in all different things, and I typed in cherries and it said 42 residual chemicals on cherries, and many of them cancer causing, all these different things. And you thought, my golly gosh. Anyway, so I was really delighted that we have a tropical cherry, because we can't grow cherries here. It's completely the wrong environment to grow cherries. So there is a tropical cherry called Gramachama. Has anyone eaten that or grown it? It's a beautiful plant. It's a glossy, gorgeous looking plant that you could replace any beautiful hedge plant here with, nice leaves, quite dense. And it has the little cherries on the stalks, and they're very deep red colour and little seed inside, tropical cherry. I think that is its common name, tropical cherry, or even Brazilian cherry, but not the Brazilian cherry that that has the ribs, which is actually a weed apparently, unfortunately. But this is a beautiful plant, and the thing is, it grows and it fruits easily in this environment, and it fruits at the right time. It's fruiting now at Christmas season, so we could quite easily replace things and not have to worry about any pest issues and things of managing cherries. So, like I said, it's the do nothing approach. But having said do nothing, it's not about just hoping for the best, chucking it all and hoping for the best. It's actually quite a considered and thoughtful approach about design, and that's what permaculture is essentially about. And that's where it's sort of the background that I have in this system is about creating a system that helps to look after itself by the way that we plan the relationships between things. And so very much I think about when I'm planting, for example, lettuces, that I have a mix of different plants, of stronger smelling plants. So there's mizunas with the lettuces and nasturtiums. Nasturtiums, does anyone grow nasturtiums, by the way? Yeah, they're very easy to grow. And they're beautiful flowers. So they're edible flowers and edible leaves, which add a bit of extra spice into the salad mix. So you've got the strong smelling plants surrounding the more sensitive plants. So that then helps to confuse pests, because pests come in by two main things. They're thinking about scent. So if they're thinking about cabbage smell or lettuce smell, and you confuse that scent, you're more likely to have greater success with your plants. The other thing is about silhouettes. They look for a shape. And so if you're confusing the shapes by having a diversity of different upright plants, spreading plants, different shaped leaves, then also you're going to have more success. You know, you might get some holes in one, or you might lose one, but you're not going to lose the whole crop. You're not going to get such a great big flush. And the added benefit of having the flowers in there, not only, you know, for the beauty of it, but also attracting your beneficial insects and your pollinators. Now, another thing you can see hiding in up here too is are the beans. So what do beans do in the system? They help to improve the soil, absolutely. So really, when all said and done, one of the key strategies that I work on in creating a pest-free garden is having good soil. And I think that's number one, bigger than anything else, because if you have healthy soil, you've got a healthy basis from which those plants can grow and be supported, and then they're far less pest prone than if they're growing in weak soil. You know yourself, if you're kind of a bit strung out, you're on edge, you've run yourself down, you don't have as much, maybe you're not eating such good food, you don't have good nutrients going in, and then you're more susceptible to getting colds or diseases. It's the same with plants, you know, they've got a really good basis of really deep nutritious soil that they're drawing from, a healthy microbial activity. Those plants are really strong, and if they have a really stable temperature and environment, so for example we use lots of mulch, you can see here lots of mulch scattered through very thickly so that you don't get these great big fluctuations in temperature, you're not getting baked soil. If you have bare soil, what happens when the sun's shining down is actually that top layer of topsoil becomes dead. There's no life in it whatsoever. What we're trying to do is actually create from the very top of that soil all the way down to create this really vibrant and alive and dynamic environment. There's actually more life under the soil, under the layer of the soil, than there is completely on the whole entire surface of the planet. I find that quite extraordinary. You know, we think, oh, it's just the dirt. It's the stuff that plants grow in. It's the most important thing to actually create stable environment and stable life. So what are the things you can do to support it? Have a mixture of plants, grow legumes as we've talked about, mulch it really thickly. Excuse me, what about the things that you can do to improve the nutrients in it? How many of you have worm farms, for example, or compost systems? Yeah, great. I want to just pass this around because this is out of my worm farm. And this used to be squishy bananas and my son's old sandwiches from his lunchbox and old avocados. And if you smell it, so I ran a little workshop for children the other day about kitchen gardening for children, and I passed it around and I said, what do you think this is, kids? And one little boy stood up and said, it's chocolate. I said, well, I'm not sure I actually make chocolate cake out of it, but you smell it and there's no evidence whatsoever of any squishy bananas and mouldy old sandwiches, and it's beautiful stuff. Once it's gone through the guts of the worms and come out the other end, they've processed it into such a fantastic nutritious blend that is just beautiful for the gut. And you know the stuff that comes out also out of the bottom of the farm. This is great stuff too, and I had to promise the kids that they wouldn't try and have a drink of this either, like it looks a little bit like blackcurrant juice or something or other. Anyway, so this mix 1 part to 10, so keeping the nutrients up is not just, quite often, if you buy a bag of potting mix, for example, even if you buy the premium potting mix, I've done trials of this just to test out how it goes. So I put a pot with just premium potting mix in it and a pot with just a standard old potting mix, and then I put the same, and then in the ground, in the gardens that I do, in the no-dig gardens, and I put the same seedlings from the same trays, a couple in that one, a couple in that one, and a couple in that one, and you can tell what's going to happen, can't you? The ones that went in the standard potting mix pretty much did nothing. There was nothing in there that those plants had to really grow in. Once they'd sort of finished what they had in their own little seed power, that was it. You have to keep feeding it. The ones that had the premium had a bit of extra nutrients, so they grew okay, but just medium-sized plants. The ones that were in the ground and had the opportunity for their roots to go deep, deep down into the soil and access all the nutrients and the minerals, and had all the composts and worm castings and all of those sorts of materials, grew absolutely flourishing, with much stronger, deeper, vibrant greens. And of course, and then you think about it, okay, so if I'm going to harvest all this food, now what would be the nutrient density of the food that's coming out of that one, and that one? So say for example kale, everyone talks about kale as a superfood and other superfood greens, the nutrient density. Kale is not kale depending on where it's grown. I mean, as a superfood, it depends on where it comes from. So the more that you focus on the soil, the stronger the plant is and the healthier it's going to be for you. So a couple of other things apart from worm farms, compost bins. Has anyone come across this stuff? It's called bokashi. Does anyone use bokashi? Yeah, how's it go for you? You all right? Yeah? How do you use it? You sprinkle this on in the kitchen and then...
No, I've got a series of 4 buckets.
Oh wow, great.
I made myself
great.
Much cheaper than buying it from the supermarket.
Yes.
And I just cycle those.
Yep.
And when I need to start a new bucket, I just keep the oldest one into the compost bin and
yep.
mix it through that.
Yeah, nice. Great.
I know that there is an alternative trenching that.
Yeah. There's lots of different ways to do it. So let me just start. So when they first came out, these bins, I went and bought some, and it cost a lot of money. I think about $90 each for this little bit of plastic, which I don't think is absolutely necessary at all. You can make your own homemade ones really easily, and to be honest, I actually don't even use this one anymore. When I was experimenting with it, so it's got this little tray in the bottom and a little bin. You put that in, you put your food scraps in, and every time you put some food scraps in, you sprinkle some of this powder. I'll pass it around. It's called bokashi. It's an effective microorganism. It's activated grains of crushed up rice and wheat. Bokashi. I'll just write it up here. So you sprinkle that on. You don't need much, just a teaspoon or so. And then each time you add more and more. The thing is, the thing that I like about this stuff particularly is that it stops your food scraps from smelling. So as you're layering them up, normally if you're collecting those food scraps, it will start to get incredibly pongy quite quickly if you leave them there for a week, particularly in summertime. And the other thing I like about this stuff is that you can also add in meat and dairy and all the stuff that you probably wouldn't add into normal things. So it extends your range of recycling the stuff that's coming out of your kitchen. The only thing with these buckets though, there's this little tap on the bottom, and you can drain off the liquid off the bottom and use a little bit like this as a fertilizer, 1 part of that to 10 parts of water, and that really helps to build up the strength of your plants. But if you let that water creep up into this, have you ever had an experience with that? Is anyone else use?
Grain food ingredient.
Yeah, okay. That's a very wise move, because I made the mistake when I was first experimenting of letting the water creep up inside. And I have to say, it was the worst smell I have ever smelt in my entire life. And at that time I had little babies with, I was changing nappies and all sorts of things, but this thing just really took the cake. And I think I actually just left it down the backyard in the corner somewhere for a while and let nature kind of clean it out, because I couldn't face it. But so I now just use straight buckets, compost buckets I collected, and let all the juice actually mix in and then tip it into the compost, same thing, and it works beautifully. And as I said, it helps you extend what you can put into a compost bin. It helps to activate it so that things become very it's a bit like I suppose probiotics or yogurt in your stomach. So if you think you've got digestive issues, you try and have probiotics to, get the good bugs back into your digestive system. Well, this is kind of like that for the decomposition process in the soil. So it's really about activating the decomposition process, getting all the microorganisms really vibrant and dynamic, and so that helps a lot. Yes?
You mentioned that you can go from the Permaculture buckets to a compost. Can you go from the Permaculture buckets to a compost?
Sure. Yep. So I also do that as well. So in terms of the worm farm, I just brought some of my little worm friends along here just as a little travelling, but they've all disappeared. Where are they? But you all know what worms look like. I had this little setup for my kids the other day. Well, they've all disappeared. Now, worms, there's a really fantastic other way of incorporating worms into your garden system, and it's really simple. So how many of you have got worm farm, like the worm farm bins, or no? Yeah, I just think they're absolutely fun. Worms are great because they process all of your food scraps into that beautiful material really quickly and really easily. I quite often, in those worm apartments, wrap up the food scraps into little newspaper parcels. I'll moisten some newspaper, put the food scraps in, make a little present and pop that in, and then the next few days I'll put the next one in. And what that does is it gets you that really good carbon-nitrogen balance, and at the same time helps to stop any little flies and things from coming in as well. Now, a really simple way of getting worms into and worm castings into your garden is to make a worm tower. Has anyone heard of these things? Yeah, so this is a big pipe about this. You can sink into the ground. You just buy a length of pipe at the hardware. They're nice thick ones. I get them about that high. I sink them into the ground about 40 centimetres here. I get a drill and just drill a whole lot of little holes in at that bottom section. Here, I'll bring that a bit forward. Drill a whole lot of holes there so the worms can come and go. So what you do is you feed your food scraps into the top. This is your garden area here. And this is the soil layer. And so the worms live in this bit, and they go in and out. They feed from the food you give them, and they take all the nutrients out into the area around them. And so rather than you having to manage the worms and take the worm castings out and take them to the garden, even in your garden you install a few of these. You actually just take the food scraps to the worms, and the worms do the rest for you. It's very simple. And then just a little upturned pot on the top to stop things from getting in. If you wanted to, you can sort of plant little things around, or I've even got the kids at some gardens to decorate them to make them look a little bit more interesting. On the top of a rooftop garden at Roma Street, there's a lovely little rooftop garden there. They've got these raised garden beds, and they've got worm farms like sunken in buckets, so that the top of this is actually level with the soil. And that's a really nice idea too. It just kind of sneaks in. There's not as much capacity. Like these you can just fill up. I quite often even pour down coffee. And this is another material that you can get so easily. Has anyone ever used coffee in their garden? Yeah. So pretty much every cafe that you go to would have maybe 50 bags of this they throw away every week. And that's an enormous amount of methane gases when it goes into waste systems. So if you can kind of extract that and repurpose it. So worms love coffee grounds, compost systems love it, sprinkling in the mix of a no-dig garden system, that really helps too. So all of these different strategies, finding the one that's the easiest for you, so that that you don't need to throw anything away. Anything that's biodegradable should be able to be turned back into the soil and back into the garden around you. And the more that you do, the more organic matter that you build up. Also growing things that add organic matter. For example, so I'm just throwing foliage around your library. Sorry about that. So this plant here, is anyone familiar with this one?
Arrowroot.
Arrowroot, yes, Queensland arrowroot. I mean, you can't go past this as a plant in Brisbane because it's just such an amazingly dynamic plant. You can see here where I've chopped it before. I constantly chop back the leaves and add it as mulch. I add it in as layers in a no-dig garden. Always just trying to add organic matter into the soil. They're also edible at the base. They're just about starting to form new shoots, and they'll form what are like potatoes on the outside. And you can snap them off without actually removing the plant, and replace them as potatoes in your dish. But I mostly use them for their tops, for organic matter. And the other thing too is that if you chop them off here and you chuck them into your chicken pen, the chicken, as they're decomposing, all these little insects come up and try and break them down, and that's extra protein for your chickens as well. So having chickens in your system is definitely another really important part of pest management, and I'll talk about that.
Privacy screen.
Oh, absolutely.
And quick.
They grow up so quickly. I've used them before too as an in-garden windbreak. So at times when there's a bit too much wind, or afternoon sun shelter for delicate plants that might get stressed out. So minimising stress is a really important thing on plants. If plants get stressed out, they get weak. Well, around the edges of the chicken pen, they can probably get about this high. But just in normal garden areas, they're probably about that high. But the thing is that they respond very well to being chopped back. So if they've got to a certain point where they're too high, just lop them back. They'll keep coming and coming again. So it's a really versatile plant for that. You can also add them into your compost layers. You can feed them to your worms if you need to. That was the other thing I was trying to think of. The chickens, on the western side, not only of your plants, but of your chickens, if you need to provide a bit of protection, they'll also come up nice and quickly, particularly in the summer months for that. So I'll just find a spot to put these back, maybe over here. Canna edulis. So just to sort of take stock of where we are at, the whole idea of permaculture is about designing for sustainable living. So as I mentioned, this approach, the do nothing approach, is not do nothing, it's a design well approach. And so it's about trying to mimic nature in a way. The idea that the way nature works, it's got it right, like in nature things don't get completely decimated by pests all the time. There's a balance, things go through waves, and it's actually accepting some of those waves and changes that happen too. For example, recently there was a flush of grasshoppers that were going through, and so the first reaction you have is to try and go in and do something about the grasshopper. But the approach that I'm trying to say is to stand back and wait and let to see what happens in the system. And so it's quite interesting to notice how you start to get a whole lot of little birds, insectivorous birds, that start to come in then and start to help you address that. And so providing, if it's birds that are going to help you, what habitat do you need to encourage the birds to come in? And so it's thinking about that in that broader sense. And so by doing this, the whole permaculture approach is about caring for the earth, caring for people, and fair share. So it's thinking, well, the insects kind of have also a right to live. So how can we support all the different species, and take an approach that's less of a battle. I think it's a way of actually bringing more joy. I talked to a lot of gardeners who go, oh, it's just so hard, I'm constantly struggling with this or constantly struggling with that. It's kind of taking a step back and finding a peaceful way of gardening. And so these are the kind of steps that not steps, they're the different strategies. So firstly, I'm going to be talking about different selection of plants. So a way of picking the plants that are less pest prone, timing your plantings. So for example, I never plant cabbages in March, even though it's kind of a pretty good time to plant them, because it's when the great big flush of cabbage moths come through. So you know you're just going to get absolutely hammered by those, and if you do it, you're going to get completely disappointed. So think about planting some other things in that time, and maybe just wait until April when all those plants have kind of, all those cabbage moths have gone through. I've been talking about how to keep the plants healthy, so from the soil perspective. Watering deeply is another idea that really helps. Quite often the watering happens just by a quick spray, and just the top, if you stick your finger into the soil, you just notice that the top's moist but underneath is quite dry still. It's really about a deep soak, far more less regularly than a quick spray more often, because what you do is you end up cultivating shallow roots when you have little sprays, because the plants are coming up to get that little water that's up on the top. But if you have deep soaking, you've got those roots are going deep down to collect all that moisture, and they're far more resilient then because they're accessing all that deep water as well. Perennialising plants. Now what I mean by that is, for example, on kale, or all sorts of plants actually. There's lots of things you can just keep harvesting the edges of. Lettuces even, you know, you can keep harvesting the edges of lettuces for a long time rather than just pulling them out. I'm working with a university, the University of the Sunshine Coast, to set up a community garden on campus there. And one of the things we're doing is we're setting up these beds, and the students, one of their projects was to make signs for all the plants, and they said, okay, well, we'll put the signs in and say, okay, harvest me now. And I was saying, well, okay, well, so your lettuces are almost ready. How are you going to encourage people to harvest them? And they were saying, well, just, you know, pull them out. And I'm thinking, well, that's one way, but another way to actually make sure that if you come in tomorrow and the next day and the day after is, as you know, if you've got open-hearted lettuces, just keep taking the outside leaves. So I had to encourage them then to change their signs. You say, pick my outside leaves rather than pick me now, because if you don't know, you probably would just pick me now and take the whole roots out. Whereas encouraging those plants to go deep and to stay for a long time. So you can do that with lots and lots of plants. You know, I've got massive great kales that are standing up on looking like trees at the moment, and some of them almost look like they were going to die recently, but I left them and just took off the battered leaves and fed them to the chickens, and then new leaves have come out of the top and they're starting to look great again. So perennialising plants, doing an absolute diversity, creating a habitat, which I'll talk a little bit more, and then mulching well, and also making sure that it's not too neat, that you have habitat for skinks and other things which are going to come in and help you. Like I mentioned, I really avoid even using natural sprays, because even natural sprays like garlic sprays and chili sprays harm the beneficial insects. And so once you start to mess with the system, and then it has follow-on effects. Once you start impacting your pollinators, your good bugs, then you start to impact on all of those different things from there on in. So this is one little garden area that I planted last year, just before I went away for about 5 weeks. Sort of planted a whole lot of things in, watered it really deeply, mulched it deeply, did a no-dig garden bed, and then walked away. And I came back, and as my son, he was the first one to come down the pathway, and I heard him this great big scream, and I thought, my gosh, there's a snake down the bottom, and I would race down the hill, and it's just, all it was the garden was huge. The garden's huge, Mum. I was like, oh, phew, that's a relief. So he was just absolutely amazed, because he helped me plant this garden only 6 or 7 weeks prior to that, and we'd done nothing. We had gone away. And so in that there's 4 or 5 different sorts of kales, there's 3 or 4 different sorts of onion families, 3 or 4 different sorts of lettuces, there's all different sorts of things mixed in there together. Some of the plants from a previous planting have gone to seed, so always letting things go to seed as well. Not everything, but so many of these plants. This is the mustard spinach, and then I think this one over here is a radish, the daikon radish. Those plants are really important for a couple of reasons. One is that they're attracting the beneficial insects, but also they're kind of like what I call sacrificial plants. For some reason, flowering, vegetables seem to be more delicious than the immature vegetables. Anyone else notice that? You look on there and there's massive great amounts of plant insects all over them, and you think your first thing is to go, oh my gosh, this plant is bringing in so many pests into my garden, I have to get rid of it. Now if you do that, what's going to happen? Where are all those pests going to go then? Onto the ones that you don't want them on. So that whole idea of the sacrificial plants, they're really, really important as part of the system. But also that if you start to develop your own cultivars, so saving seed is a really important thing, that if you can get seeds that are really adaptable to your soil, to your climate, with the qualities that you want, that are very hardy, and you save seeds from those, then each season you're actually making a stronger and stronger plant. I think many of us have a notion that seeds are a static thing, you know, like we have the heritage seeds, it's really important to preserve them, but each time you handle a seed and grow a seed, you're changing it. So even the heritage varieties, you're evolving into new cultivars that are changing over time. And so if you save seeds from ones that you've used lots of chemicals on, or save seeds from things that you've overwatered, you're actually cultivating seeds that need chemicals and lots of water to grow. If you have seeds from plants, for example, that you've watered very little and are very hardy, and then you save seeds from that, you've actually got a super hardy variety that you're developing. And you notice that too when, for example, you have lots of self-seeding plants in your garden. How many of you have self-seeding things growing? What are the most vibrant self-seeding plants that you've got? Basil, yeah. What? Rocket? Parsley? Mustard, absolutely mustard, all different sorts of mustard. What else? Nasturtiums, coriander, tomatoes, pumpkins. I can't remember the last time I planted a pumpkin. How many people plant pumpkins? You know, they just keep coming, don't they? Now, so here we go. I didn't want to harvest a really big pumpkin because it was... So there's the little pumpkin forming here. And so you can tell the difference between the male and female flowers. I just knocked that one off. So there's a little flower on the top of that. So the female flower is the one that's got the little pumpkin and the flower. And the male flower is the one that's got just the stem. I don't know if you can see that there. Just the stem and the flower. So if you're having problems with your pumpkins falling off, you know that you need to get some pollen from a flowering male plant and take it and put it on the flowering female plant that's open, and that way you can inhabit. But see, these things, they're just so abundant. I had a stack this big of pumpkins this year. They'd been growing up over the top of my chicken pen. Someone came up there recently and said, wow, I really like the way that you've created that archway of pumpkins over your beautiful shade for your chickens, and what a great idea to have them hanging down like that. It's great, isn't it? The pumpkin had a great idea. I didn't do anything about it. Absolutely amazed. They're just pumpkins, you know. The only thing about pumpkins, you've got to make sure they don't go all the way over your vegetable patch, but also your fruit trees, and start to bonsai them. But I try and let them go in and around underneath all the fruit trees, because they create this beautiful habitat. Quite often I find frogs in there and all different sorts of, lizards hiding underneath, and they, all the moisture that gets caught in their leaves and gets directed down into the soil, and as the leaves die off, it's adding organic matter. So it's kind of like a living mulch on the top of the soil. And the other thing about this too is that they volunteer themselves. They're hardy. I've done nothing. They're quite pest resistant in terms of growing them. And you've got all these extra edible bits. Now, who eats pumpkin tips? Yes, how do you prepare them? You just snip this bit off? Oh, you put it in soup? Yeah, nice. Some people steam them. Oh, okay. You can just as well do it here. They're just as edible here as they are back home. And this bit here, these young leaves too. lovely green leafy vegetable. Now I use these quite often if I'm making like a spinach and feta bake. You know, I go up to the chicken pen, get some eggs, and I range through my garden looking for all leafy green materials and herbs and all sorts of things, and I just blend it all together and throw it in the oven, and then it's cooked. Now you don't have to have spinach or silver beet to do that. There are so many leafy greens that you can use to do that, and these sort of things, by looking for the things in your garden that grow so well and that just come by themselves and don't have a pest issue, helps you to get away from having to deal with pests. So you're always looking in your garden, what does well without me even doing absolutely anything? Pumpkins is one at this time of year. And what else does incredibly well? I've got a little, the kale is incredibly hardy. What about these little things? I mean, you can't knock a lot of people knock chokers, but you can't really knock chokers. I actually find them quite amazing things. I grew up in Victoria, and so when I came to Queensland about 20 years ago, it was a new thing for me. Those of you who've grown up in Queensland go, oh, choco. You don't really want to eat choco, but they are so abundant. You know, you just pop that in the ground and this little seed starts growing up, and you've got this whole fence full or shed covered of choco vines with an enormous amount of food on there, which can be used in so many different ways. But also the leaves are all edible, so you can eat the leaves of that. There's so many different leaves that you can eat. What other leaves? The leaves of beetroot are far more nutritious than the bulb of a beetroot. Carrot leaves.
Would you eat these leaves raw?
These leaves?
Would you use it as a salad?
You could, the young ones. If you pass that one back. Sorry, pass that one back. That one I probably would, but when I get back to this sort of level and they start getting more prickly, then no. So that one's nice and soft, I would, absolutely. But this one here, these ones I would steam up. I mean, you can add them in as a spinach, and as soon as you start cooking them, the fibres go. It's something that you think, oh gosh, I wouldn't eat that, that's disgustingly rough. You know, it's not something you'd think of eating. But if you steam this up even lightly, and just put them out as a sort of like green wraps, you can fill them up with rice and vegetables and wrap them up and dip them in nice little dipping sauce. They make, you know, dolmades, people use what, grape leaves. If you look at a grapevine, you wouldn't immediately think, oh, that looks like a delicious leafy green. But there's so many things. The things that I avoid eating are the Solanaceae family, you know, all the eggplants and tomatoes and all those sorts of things. So the reason I'm telling you that this is part of this talk about pests is because this is the stuff that's easy to grow, that doesn't get pest bitten. And other things, what about the tomatoes? Which tomatoes are the ones which you can grow which are so easy without any pests bothering you? Absolutely. How much do you pay for a tub of cherry tomatoes in the soup? I don't even know. How much do you pay? Probably. They are. But they're so easy. And the more each year, as they just keep coming, they start, I don't know about you, have you noticed they start getting bigger? They start off in your first year when they first kind of go wild, they're quite little, and then each year they get bigger and bigger. Mine, I've had cherry tomatoes, you know, massive cherry tomatoes, absolutely delicious, and they're so much nicer fresh out of your garden too. So if you can, to allow things to self-seed, give your garden the space. So if your soil is good and, you know, something self-seeding, it will just wait there dormant until the environment's right for that next thing to take. Other plants, sorry, yes?
We have a cherry tomato. Most of them are pulled out because of fruit fly. This one is in a very diverse little area with a million other things that just grew by itself. Most of the fruit fly actually don't attack it because the fruit goes below other leaves.
Ah, hidden, yes, yeah. And I think that's the thing. If you can, if you can either hide it, obscure it, confuse the pests, or have things around it that are actually picking off the stuff that's bothering it, then that's the strategy. And so it's an interesting, the thing is to observe, to see what's going on. You know, there's different spaces in each of our gardens, and yeah, so I think, yes, and then inviting our helpers. So for example, the one of the easiest things to invite in are your chickens. How many of you have chickens, by the way? Yeah, a couple, or
I have 4.
4, nice.
I've got a question after.
Sure,
Ask you about.
go for it.
Oh, now?
Yeah, if you like.
I haven't laid a single egg in weeks.
Oh, they're probably heat stressed.
Well, they got shade on both sides.
Yeah, still, it's just the ambient temperature. Mine have gone off a little bit too. Give them a break.
They keep it up there.
No, they do. They do get a bit heat stressed. Like when it's sort of extreme temperatures in either way, they sort of just panting and
Even on cooler days.
yeah. That they go through cycles as well. Just give them time
They
and
go through cycles.
yeah. So chickens are great helpers. Now it all depends on what kind of system you've got. For example, in my main vegetable garden, I don't let the chickens in there because otherwise they just scratch up and eat all the different things. I let the chickens go out on the outerage. So they look after my orchard area and, you know, just the areas around. And they do a fabulous job at that. But there's other helpers that you want to attract into your garden too. And they're mostly the predatory insects. And so how do you attract those sorts of things? And attracting the little birds. So you want to attract the insectivorous birds. Some ways of doing that is these birds are very susceptible to being attacked by bigger predatory birds, and quite often the ones that you'll find in urban areas. So how can you do that? Create little dense bushes and habitats for them. And one of the plants that I plant regularly for those, well, a couple of plants, I've got a few in here. This one is one of my main ones that I put in, which is the perennial or sacred basil, and it creates nice little bushes about this high, and they're very dense. So it has a lot of benefits in terms of pest management. I should mention too that anything up here that I've got that are plants that you can take cuttings from, you're very welcome to take cuttings from at the end of the session. I've got quite a lot of different things we can snip off sections. So this one here, it has these great long flower spikes, so it's constantly got bees around it. So it's my bee bush. It also has really dense little leaves, so it's constantly active with little birds hiding there. So you notice if you have little spots where the birds can jump from one little plant to the next little plant to the next little plant, and then they swoop down, they grab off the insects. So these sorts of things provide habitat. And you need it not just one bush here and one bush there, you need that corridor of habitat. So a protection all the way along for them, and also adding in water. So having little ponds or little bird baths and all different sorts of things for them. And the other thing too is having little spots for them to nest. So if your garden's so clean, there's not stuff for them to pick up, you know, bits of mulch and nesting materials, little sticks and twigs and things, you know, they'll go and nest somewhere else. So I always encourage birds, little hidey holes and spots for them. Recently I chopped my son's hair, and he said, "Oh no, don't throw out the hair, because I'd like to do something with it." I'm not quite sure what he was planning to do with his hair, but anyway, I left it in a little bucket for him on the edge of the veranda. And as most things with his ideas of projects, they wait for a very long time before they start to happen. And anyway, he missed his chance because the birds came in and started picking up all his hair and taking it out and making little nests out of it. So my son's hair has lined many a bird's nest in our garden. So these small birds are actually declining in a lot of cities because of the, you know, things like the crows and the miners and all different sorts of things, and they are very vulnerable to that. So that then means that, you know, if there's less of them, the insects that, you know, there's more insects that will flourish, and there's less habitat too in the cities often for the predatory insects. So. And more sprays. So all of these things are vulnerable to sprays and the lack of habitat for them. So it's really about trying to create those, because these sorts of birds, they eat the slugs and the snails and the grubs and the caterpillars and the grasshoppers and all those things that you often have problems with in your garden. So the more that so rather than thinking about how can I get rid of that pest, it's how can I encourage these birds, these beings to come into my garden and help me with my work. Frogs too. There are so many different frogs that you could invite into your garden And you know, a lot of the urban habitat programs that are around, they have great, you know, like local native species getting little baths. So what things attract frogs into your garden? What do you need? But not just a bucket of water, is it? What type of water do you need? Sorry, I can't.
I don't know, I'm puzzled for the same type of water.
Well, what type of, you know, not a bucket of water, because if you put a bucket of water, then they fall in, they'll probably die in there. So then you need a shallow one with nice natural edges and maybe, you know, a branch going in so they can climb in and out easily and not get trapped in there. Same with lizards and things. So.
I'm thinking cats.
Oh, cats. Well, protection from, yeah, I mean, that's also an issue too, isn't it? I suppose.
Our cat died, then the frog came back, and we see the abundance of other little things.
Yeah.
I noticed there's another cat that's decided our yard is lovely.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and it does make a huge difference. Up at Crystal Waters, one of the things, I mean, I don't dislike cats or dogs, but we have this thing at Crystal Waters where there are no cats and dogs, and it's particularly for the wildlife, and it's incredible what you see in terms of the ground-dwelling birds and the little lizards and all those little species that are, you know, the quails and the rails and amazing things around. And also, you know, lots of little kangaroos and wallabies, all the little baby kangaroos around everywhere.
Yeah, my daughter has a very bushy backyard, and she has 3 cats because somebody said, oh, if you keep cats, the snakes stay away.
Ah.
Or they find the snakes. So what do you think?
I'm not sure that they would scare the snakes away. A dog might, but I don't think a cat would. She needs to trade them for some dogs. Yeah, probably. But you know, snakes are also really important in the system as well. We have snakes that visit our place every now and then. My husband's become quite the snake catcher. It doesn't deal with any of the poisonous ones, but you know, the carpet snakes that are on the veranda. You know, if you've got kids, he doesn't really want them around, so he'll kind of get a bin and hook it up very gently and just plop it into the bin and take it down to the river. And he's yeah, it's quite a spectacle watching this. He thinks he's so brave. Anyway, the frogs, if we, you know, it's not just, what are the reasons for having frogs? Frogs are indicators of a healthy ecological system, but from a gardener's perspective, frogs eat all of these things. Amazing. They eat the slugs and the snails. They also eat the flies and mosquitoes, which bother us, and they eat moths, grasshoppers, cockroaches, spiders, and lots of other things. So these things are the insectivorous. So the more that you have habitat all throughout your garden, and the whole garden becomes a frog habitat, not just a frog pond somewhere, but think about having, you know, moist leafy cover and lots of little ponds and amazing little spots for them, logs and any pond, to make sure you have those little logs going in and out. I think the other day I went and opened up the car door, and I was about to get in and shut the door, and then my son noticed this massive great green tree frog sitting in the car door. I don't know how it got there, but anyway, I'm glad I didn't end up squishing it. But there's amazing different sorts. My daughter was doing some research lately about endangered species in our area, and one of the ones she came across was a gastric breeding frog. Has anyone you know about this one? It's quite an extraordinary frog. It's more in the drier zones up around the Conondale Range. It's extinct now, but it used to swallow its eggs, so it'd lay its eggs and then swallow it, because inside it's a moist environment. And so then when the frogs hatched, it would kind of like burp them back out again, so that it bred the frogs inside its inside, whereas normally they, you know, who knows the difference between frogs' eggs and toads' eggs? Someone has to know the difference. No, it's a really important thing to know. Okay, so if you're looking at your pond and you see toad's eggs, please pull them out. If you see if frog's eggs, obviously leave them in there. So the difference is toad's eggs are like black strings of pearls. So if you see this sort of long stringy line of black pearls connected in a line, that's toads. Just scoot them out, and that way you won't get all the little toads going around because they compete. They compete with the natives and they don't do the same job as frogs do, and they're introduced, and we all know the problem with cane toads. Frogs, on the other hand, look like little bits of like detergent fluff, like bubbly stuff with little dots in the bubbles. Yeah, so leave that. Sometimes you see it on a tree branch. Sometimes it's on the edge of a pond. Sometimes it's floating around, and so leave those and take out the strings of black pearl. So it's really important to know the difference with that. So skinks also, similar type of diet. All these insectivorous insects and insectivorous animals help you with your insects. So the moths, slaters, flies, grubs, caterpillars, grasshoppers, cockroaches, small spiders, ants, and again lots of other ones. So the habitat for skinks. Where do you see skinks? What do you need to have in your garden to provide habitat for them? Mulch. What else do you need apart from mulch? Little logs and hidey holes, maybe some hollow logs. So often that twiggy, branchy stuff that you go, oh, that looks a bit untidy, I might just scoop that up and take that away, is really great things for those. So if you've got trees, maybe leave a few logs and branches and bigger stuff in and around there so they can sun themselves, you know, because they need to get the sun to be able to move. So they need to sit up on a log and get the sun on themselves. I need hidey holes that they can duck in underneath so they're protected if the birds can, you know, because birds will probably want to eat these as well. Not the insectivorous ones, but the bigger ones. So providing the habitat, and also microbats, you know, that live in the bigger trees. And again, they only eat insects. So we're not talking about the fruit bats, we're talking about the insectivorous, the microbats, and they can eat up to, like it says here, 1,200 mosquitoes and small insects in an hour. That's a massive amount. So at night time, your garden, if your habitat is there, your garden is still working on maintaining its pest issue. So again, also it eats lots of things, even like the aphids that are problems. And on some organic farms, they're even starting to employ these as workers as part of their system, so introducing them as part of their pest management strategy. So as well as attracting your bats and your insectivorous birds and your skinks and your frogs, there's lots of other little insects, you know, and I talked about the good bugs, the beneficial insects. How can you attract those? So they're the things like the lacewings, ladybugs, little tiny wasps and hoverflies, and they actually help to manage all your things like your aphids and mites, caterpillars and other pests. I was recently looking at my citrus plant and I saw these little eggs up on stalks like that waving around. Has anyone ever seen those before? Yeah, so that's the eggs of the lacewing. Great. Don't rub them off thinking that's a problem. They're the really good ones. So if you see that, go, thank you very much, lacewing. You're in my garden, you're in my system. So things that attract these beneficial insects. Look, there's a whole great list of them here. From yarrow, let's see, I've got a few of these things here. So yarrow is flowering at the moment. This is yarrow. And you can see it's got these great big insect landing pad flowers on the top of it. Sort of the umbrella family. Now a lot of this is of the umbrella family, the umbelliferae family. This one here, this is fennel. So fennel and dill look very similar to this. Now just by the by, if you wait a little bit longer, once these flowers have finished flowering and they die back, that's where all your fennel seeds are, and you can just take off all the tops and then use them in your cooking or let them seed back out into your garden. Tansy, we've got some tansy down here. Little yellow, oh, they're just starting, it's hard to see, little yellow buttons. Buckwheat. So if you go into the shop, you can either go and get some seed buckwheat, and it's quite expensive to buy packets of seed like this, but you can go into an organic store and buy, you know, raw buckwheat and just scatter that around. You'll get far more value for your money in terms of, you know, what you can get. And so the buckwheat, it has masses of white flowers all over it too. Buckwheat's also great for turning back into the soil and adding organic matter. Lemon balm, pennyroyal. Pennyroyal's a beautiful, strong, scented plant that grows all the way across the ground, but has lovely flowers at times as well. Now, a lot of these, the parsley and the caraway and all these plants are pretty much, it's more when they're flowering. So you want to try and have it so that you've got different things flowering at different times. So when the marigolds and the calendulas finish, now it's the cosmos time and the fennel time. Things that flower pretty much all the time, and which is why I have them, are things like these ones. Who knows what this is? Society garlic, that's right. I mean, it's always flowering in your garden. It's almost always anyway. And what I showed you before, the basil. The basil's, there it is, thank you. That's almost always flowering. And I often include lots of things too, like salvia. Salvia's often got flowers growing on it. And even things like the, where is it? Here, the pelargoniums. There's always got little flowers. So if try and have something that's flowering all the time. And that may even be native. So at the moment, I've got fantastic flowering going on in the the lemon myrtle. It's beautiful. I'll pass this around because not only do I love the scent of the lemon myrtle leaf and use that a lot in cooking and all sorts of things. I might just see if I can take off a couple of things and send them different directions. The scent of the flower is absolutely gorgeous. You can imagine what the honey might be like from that. It's just, how big do they grow? Well, they can grow quite big actually, being a rainforest margin plant. However, if you top them, I keep my lemon myrtle, I've got a few different spots of lemon myrtle. A couple I let grow big, but there's one or two that I have kept low, and so they're only just below this beam height, and so you can keep them a small plant. Yeah. Another plant which has flowers at different times and is really useful as one of those diversity plants is pigeon pea. So it's just finished flowering recently, and it should be flowering again soon. But it's pigeon pea it's a perennial legume bush or shrub. You use the leaves for mulch and organic matter and making compost and adding, just chop and drop mulch. But then it has lots of little pea flowers all over it, and then edible peas that you wait till they're dry and you use that like a dal. So if you think of it, and maybe there's even, at the moment too, soon, I've scattered chia out through the garden. So how many of you eat chia? Yeah, so just grab a handful of that and scatter it out through the garden and it will come up. Let me see if I can find a sample of the chia. It's over here somewhere. Yeah, it doesn't like being plucked, it's gone a bit wilted. Here. Sorry, I'm going to put it upside down because it's all floppy now. So it gets quite big. It's about this big, and when the leaves are young, you can eat them in a salad. Very high protein as well. And then soon, it's about to just right at the top. It's about to start throwing out its seeds, which look a little bit like the salvia. Here, well, it is actually a salvia plant, Salvia hispanica. So it looks similar to that, and when it's dry, that's where all the seeds are. So again, another plant which you can add in to increase the biodiversity value of your garden. And even things like, the lily pillies, when they're flowering. So how many different flowering plants can you incorporate in? So if you see a gap in a time of the year, think about what you can slot in there to really increase it. And it's just so easy to keep think for example the marigolds. When the marigolds were flowering, I just kept deadheading them to keep the flowering going longer and longer and longer. And so you just take off these little ones, and inside of that there's all the seeds of the marigold. So it's so easy to harvest seeds and allow things just to keep going on and on and on. Same with the cosmos, that's where the seeds are for that.
Just ask one question.
Sure.
got a lot of what you're suggesting, you know, massive shrubbery plants from various things that, like marigolds that CDs thing. They can't handle the grass that keeps growing into the garden beds. As dense as everything is, the grass loves it just as much, and it gets in there. And I spend half my time just trying to eliminate it. But is that because my paths are grass, whereas you have all pebbles or brick?
Well, what I try to do in the main vegetable garden area is to have it completely mulched. So, for example, because that does become a problem, particularly at this time of year when things are so virulent in terms of their growing. So, I have the wall, and I sort of have little terraces, and then there's a main pathway, and then there's another terrace. So this is on contour. So as the rain falls, it falls down on here and then gets fed into little pathways. So all of this area here is completely mulched. And this is actually grass, and I just go along that with the mower every now and then. And along this edge here, every now and then, I just go along with a shovel and just chop the edge just to pull the grass back. But all of this being completely mulched, if the grass does go over, I get there, you know, soon enough, I can just pull it back, chop it off and chuck it into the chooks, and it's easy to manage. So this bit here, all of this section and all of these pathways are completely mulched with, so I put lots of compost, then I put newspaper on the top, and then mulch on top of that. So that way you've got this weed barrier on the top of everything, so there's no weeds coming up through that. And it actually, when the weeds kind of go on the top, their roots don't really get down into the soil, and they're just easy to flop back over. And so that makes it, because quite often, I bought my little no-dig garden demo of a instruction thing here. So even though I say no dig, so I start off, I water the ground really well, and then I fork it. I open up the soil so it's nice and loose, because you want to make sure that the moisture and the air can get into the soil. If it's compacted, it can't be alive. So this helps to sort of make it alive. And then I add in a great big layer of compost, what's going to become the new layer of topsoil. So that can be anything from compost and worm castings, leafy green materials, all different sorts of things. And then on top of that, I put thick layers of newspaper, so like 10 sheets thick, at least moist. And I go over the path as well. So I go all the way down over the path and back up the other side. So the pathways are always completely covered with that, because otherwise the edges become, and I never put rocks here around the edges, because when you start putting rocks around it, that's where all the little grassy bits come up, or little, you know, at different times, a long time ago I used to get, you know, nice little bricks and put them along the edge, and then that became the weedy problem. And so the only edge I've got is right at the edge of the terrace, and then everything back from there is just all natural edging. And it shifts and changes over time, because, you know, maybe there's a big perennial bush that kind of grows, and so I just shift the pathway up a little bit, loosen that bit, and then and so I try and maximise. So in this bit here, quite often I see, you know, people with gardens, and there's, you know, garden bed, garden bed, garden bed, and all this is pathway. Make most of your garden in your vegetable area, and have all you need to do is have a little sort of keyhole, and then you've got all this extra space here for garden. You only need a little bit to get in. As long as you can get in here and reach to the middle, and then the next little pathway you reach to the middle, and if from this pathway here you can reach across here. So the idea is having little pathways in that you can reach to everything without stepping on it. As you can probably tell, I have most of my gardens in the ground. I find the more that the gardens are raised up, the more the sun hits on the side, heats up the roots and heats up the whole system, and the plants struggle a bit more in that than they do if they're in the ground and protected. So I do prefer things down. I know, you know, for bending down and back, but that's why, you know, from a terrace perspective it works okay, but there's different reasons and different strategies. Now, the reason I showed you the no-dig method I use is because if you look in a book, you're most likely going to find a different way. Who's seen a no-dig garden book before? What's the method that they say?
And it's not a straw and newspaper layering.
Oh, there's lots of lasagna method, they call it, or something, but quite often it's about putting the newspaper or cardboard down first. So the key problem I have with that is that you've got all this life in the soil, and then you could put this great big barrier, and then you layer stuff on top of it. So you're creating a difference between what's on top and what's on bottom. What you're wanting to do is actually, you're top feeding the soil organisms, really is what you're doing with this new system. You're trying to activate and feed what's going on down underneath. The newspaper layer and cardboard is just on top to stop all the weeds from coming through, and unless you're a master composter, anything in your compost is going to start sprouting as well. So you really, want to try and, so it's flipping it upside down. There's a lot of different reasons. Also, if you plant into this and you've got newspaper at the bottom, the roots go down to the newspaper and go sideways. And so if you've got a bit of a breeze or it's a really hot day, that all gets baked. They get all too dry, and then the wind comes over and knocks them over. Whereas if you plant into this, very rapidly their roots go down into that moister, more fertile system, and they can hold themselves up a bit more. So
Newspaper layer on the top, and with our dry weather,
yep.
the newspaper eventually comes up, so obviously you would have to keep mulching.
Oh look, I have a very thick layer of mulch on top, so that when I have this, it's a really rocket science method. When you say, I get people to cover it completely over with mulch and then add a bit more. And so when you first do it, and then you water it down so it's all kind of nice and locked in. And if you see any bit of newspaper anyway, just throw more on. And so when you plant into it, you just make this nice little bird's nest, and then you grab a digger like this, nice little narrow one, and you just put a little hole through the newspaper, put a nice big handful of compost in that hole, and you plant your seedling in there, or a big seed, and that's how you plant. If you want to do carrots, you might open up a line and then scribe it and make a sort of a handful of compost all the way down and sprinkle your seeds. But
the problem was that I didn't keep mulching.
Yeah.
And then because I had newspaper coming up.
As soon as you see newspaper, cover it, because as soon as the sun, as you say, sees the newspaper, it dries it out and becomes an ineffective weed barrier, and it looks ugly as well. You never want to see the newspaper. So,
Sorry, so did you say not to put newspaper on the soil?
No. You open up the soil, you water the soil. I always add things like chook poo or liquid fertilizer, because if you think about how in nature, if you're out in the forest, how do the soil organisms get fed? What happens if you're in a forest? How do the soil organisms get fed? Stuff drops on their head, doesn't it? Like fruit falls, leaf falls. So how does that get into the soil? We don't, nature doesn't dig it in, does it? Those things go up and they grab it and they take it down and they draw it down into the soil. So what you're essentially doing is copying that process. Is you sort of open up the soil, make sure it's nice and loose. You don't turn it, because then you're destroying the structure of the soil and where all those organisms are. You just open it and then feed them on the top, and then they come up and get it, draw it in. And so when you add this much on the top of a no-dig method like this, you're essentially getting this much vibrancy and activity. You're really activating it beautifully, and that helps to make all these plants super strong. The couple of the ones down the bottom here too, like dandelion, it's a weed you find all over the place. And recently down at the university, we'd started to try and activate the soil in this dreadful spot we got. I don't know, any of you involved in community gardens? I've been involved. I helped to start up Northey Street City Farm, and then several other city farms and community gardens, and you find you always get given the worst possible soil. It's kind of like the back end of nowhere, the soil that you can't dig. Anyway, down at the university, it's the back end of the sports oval, and it's like clay and boggy and salty. And it's dreadful soil. Anyway, we've been doing a lot of work recently, and I was so excited the other day because I saw this clover starting to sprout out across this grassy patch that we'd been, next to where we've been doing the vegetable garden. Now, so I saw that as a really good sign that some activity and some value was starting to develop in the soil. So it's kind of an indicator too of good things going on. So you also want to attract ladybugs. They do a great job in helping to manage the aphids. And a lot of those flowers will attract those in. like I said before too, it's about the timing of plantings and really choosing the hardier species. I've talked about kale in a few different ways, but if I'm looking to have cabbage, and I really enjoy having cabbage, you know, I like having it in salad, I like having it in stir fries, all different sorts of things, but instead of going for the drumhead type cabbage, I go for the open-hearted varieties, the ones that are more hardy, and I actually replace kale for a lot of cabbage ingredients, and I also have, because this happens all too often. Who grows cabbages and gets that sort of problem going on? Your cabbage is almost ready and you're getting so excited, then you open it up and inside it's all, you know, oh, no, really? So particularly, I mean, we're in the subtropics and it's just such an amazing insect environment. Things just thrive. So try and think of how you can make things more hardy. Another plant that I use often as an alternative to cabbage are things like, you know, has anyone grown broccoli or cauliflower? Those beautiful leaves on the side. Has anyone ever eaten those? They're fantastic. They're great. That's a cabbage alternative. So it has the, you know, it's of the brassica family. There's so much that you can eat instead of the ones, because we try so hard, you know, we want to get, and we spend a lot of time trying to protect things that perhaps are more suited to Melbourne or England. We sort of bring a concept that we should be growing this and this and this, whereas perhaps we should be growing, you know, kales and yacons and jaboticabas instead of cherries and apples and carrots and cabbages, for example. So it's about selecting your species and be willing to experiment a bit more. Again, the same thing with the fruits. Fruit fly can be an extraordinarily devastating problem in your garden. And so, again, attracting the things that eat fruit flies are spiders, ants, chickens, ground beetles, and lots of birds. So again, the whole habitat, everything I've been talking about supports the management of fruit flies as well. And also making sure that you clean up around any fruit that's fallen. Another good strategy for that is actually growing dwarf varieties. So instead of growing massive great fruit trees and you can't manage what's going on up the top, actually keeping them low so you can see what's happening. Let the chickens forage around underneath your fruit trees to help pick up the, you know, anything that's got the eggs and the little larvae. But my main strategy would be, rather than trying to protect fruit fly prone plants, is grow fruit fly resistant plants. And so here's all the different sorts of plants that are really resistant to fruit fly in your garden. So there's lots of different. Does it? Oh, really?
Big bag, 25%.
So what about if you harvested earlier then?
No,
they still get it? Oh, what a shame. All right, so maybe, you know, in your spot, you know what it is that's not going to work. And so I definitely never try and grow anything like, I never try and grow, what am I trying to say, guava or anything like that. I know it just gets completely bitten. I mostly focus on things like, you know, bananas and citrus and gramachamas and jaboticabas, all those sorts of things that tend to be, for me, the most hardiest plants. And it depends on how much you want to manage it. If you're up for doing lots of bagging, control and management, if you want to go the sort of the no management method, it's a process. So yeah, choosing those easy to care plants. So these are the jaboticabas. So they're the ones that I grow lots of those sorts of plants, and these are the ones that I grow less of because they get bitten all the time. And I grow lots and lots of different sorts of citrus, all different sorts of citrus, because, you know, they've got their own little protection. And then all different sorts of mulberries as well. You know, other things get the mulberries and other things get the jaboticabas. But I plant the jaboticabas. So the pest for the jaboticabas is the birds. You know, they come in and peck things off. So I plant them right on the pathway, and you can use them as a hedge. So you walk past them every day and you get to see, they're coming. I can see those little green balls starting to form on the trunk. You sort of poke your head in because they grow on the trunk and they're more protected, so they're hidden. But the birds eventually find them. So if you get there first though, you can get a really good harvest and harvest them all off.
Bats do too.
What's that, sorry?
Bats do too.
Oh yeah, but so the thing is, again, keeping things small enough so that you can easily harvest things, and keeping them in a spot where you're going to check them regularly, and growing lots of hardy plants. So I've talked about these sorts of ones, the arrowroot, this is the pigeon pea, and other things like the cassava. Has anyone grown cassava here? Yeah. How do you prepare yours? You cook it up or use the leaf, the root? Not successful.
Cook it. You can boil it.
Just boil it, yep. Yeah. It's easy plant to grow, and it's an easy plant. So this is underneath the soil, so this is all washed off. So it has massive amounts of roots underneath that you can cook up and eat, and I use it like I would a sweet potato type of plant, really nice, nutty. I really like the flavour of it. If any of you have ever eaten things like veggie chips, you have eaten cassava before. Cassava flour gets used for lots of things. But all you need is a stick of it. You stick it in the ground in a nice sort of mulchy area, and these roots go out, and I even harvest the leaves off the top, and then fossick around and take out the roots from the bottom. If you want to get a nice big selection of roots, you need to sort of snap off a stick and plant it in, just before the warm season, then you'll get a really good crop happening. If you leave it in the ground, you'll end up getting really woody, fibrous roots. So fresh every year is good. And it's easy. It's so pest resistant. It actually feeds probably, a tenth of the world's population with their main source of carbohydrate. We're so unfamiliar with it in Australia because it's probably more of a survival food, but therefore it's an amazingly easy plant to grow and a great one to have. So anyone eaten the leafy green bits off cassava? Do you eat the leaves? No? I just boil them up. I toss away the water and then I use it to make sambal, like mix it up with some chili, and really, really nice. I've talked about this already a bit before, so collecting your own seed, adapting your own seed, making sure that you're building up the strength of it, focusing on the soil, really making sure that you're building up that soil fertility and mulching incredibly well. Don't overwater, maybe set up. I actually don't have a watering system in my garden on purpose because I really want to try and collect as much rainwater as possible and let it soak into the soil. Have the soil open, a lot of organic matter that acts as a sponge. Because really what you want is this soil. This is I forgot I was in a library for a moment. So this is cocoa peat, cocoa fibre. So it's the ground up outside edges of coconuts, and when you squish this, I won't do it here, it drips with water. It's this stuff here, you buy it in the brick, so cocoa peat. So even if you've only got a very small garden and just using pots, try and add a lot of this sort of material into it because it holds the moisture in the soil. If you're making your own potting mixes or planting out with seedlings, add this in as well as part of your mix in your garden. It helps to add that water holding capacity in there. It's really useful. So encourage.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Tree branches, how good are they decomposed to produce material like that?
You would probably need to grind them up quite finely first, and then I would probably compost them for a while before you do, because if you add that directly into the soil, then you'll be using a lot of the nitrogen from the soil to break down the high carbon matter in the tree branches. So I would find it probably a good idea to have a big pile somewhere that you chop up branches and leave them and let them decompose, or just let them lay down one or two, but not a massive amount. Yeah. Have you got a lot of tree branch material, or?
No, but you've got very little space.
Yep.
Which is why tree branches become a bit of a nuisance.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely. Have you got a little mulcher of some sort? No. Chop. Yep. Well, if you're just chopping it up finely, then I would then use that as that chop and drop mulch around. And if you didn't like the look of it, top dress it with other mulch and have it in around underneath, and just let that become, let that become the structure of it. If you spread it around though a bit more, so it's not so concentrated in one form, what I was thinking you were saying was like grinding it up into like a chips, the wood chip. That can actually, if you add wood chips into a garden, that can take too much nutrients out. But lots of little branches, that's absolutely fine. It's beneficial. It adds structure. Yeah. And the other thing to consider too is that, you know, holes cook well. There's really nothing wrong with a few holes in your spinach leaf, because, you know, it might not be perfect, but that's not going to hurt it, is it? I mean, it's a clean leaf. There's nothing wrong with the leaf itself. It just has a couple of holes in it, and that's fine. So accepting the imperfections can help us to manage, you know, our pest issue a bit too. And, you know, one of the things that I find in one of the problems that I have with the whole food system is that we waste so much food before it even gets to the shops because it's not perfect. I think the recent figure I heard was at least 40% of the food gets left out at the farm because it's not good enough to send to the market, and that's just absolutely disgusting. And that's because we have this perception that food has to look a certain way.
The shops are now selling agri-food.
Oh, I love those shops, yes.
I think you can call it Woolies.
Yeah. Yeah, so things are changing. We are becoming more aware of that. But, you know, one of the issues around the whole food waste is that you had 40% at least that was getting lost there. Then there was more along the way. Stuff would get lost at the supermarkets, and by the time it got to your kitchen and then got left in the back of your fridge, you know, it could be up to 75% of the food that got grown in some places was actually being wasted. And that's just an extraordinary massive amounts of waste. If you think for every calorie that you eat, it's taken at least 10 calories of fossil fuels to get it there, and you think, you know, well, we have a situation where 1 billion people are going hungry to bed every night, and yet, you know, we say, well, we're not producing enough food in the world. Well, actually we are. We're just not respecting the food, or not dealing with it right, or not appreciating food with holes is good enough to eat. So I think that's a huge thing for us too. So just in summary, some of the key points were about selecting your plants well, selecting different plants that are seasonal, locally adapted, really hardy, timing them so that they didn't come at the same time that massive flushes of the cabbage moth or grasshoppers took place, making sure that you keep the plants healthy so that the soil fed the plants and that you watered them deeply. Perennialise them, so the more that you keep taking the outside edges off, the more that the roots are going to go deep. The more you just try and plant and rip out, they become more vulnerable and sensitive. So a diversity of plants, getting that cultivated ecology, having a lot of habitat for your helpers, and I was thinking also, you know, habitat for these little helpers too, if you've got any, because the more that they get out into your garden and they're helping to look after things and seeing what's going on, that's great too. Mulching well. Lots of habitat for the skinks and the frogs, and like we just talked then about changing our attitudes to blemished produce. So that's kind of my overall strategy to managing pests in the garden. It becomes a really peaceful and relaxing place to actually get out and enjoy your garden rather than struggling with it. Thank you for listening. I think it's time for a cup of tea. Before I finish though, I just wanted to let you know that there's a couple of little articles up here and some magazines that I've written. There's one about perennial plants and one about our house and garden. And this is in PIP, the Permaculture magazine. I'm not sure if the libraries have this one yet. It's a recent magazine. It's just done the last couple of years. So I write for this one all the time. It's a great, it's got lots of really fantastic articles all about permaculture from an Australian perspective. So that's a really good one. I've got information about a permaculture course that's going to start happening up at Crystal Waters in the middle of next year. If you'd like to receive my newsletter, I've written there monthly, but actually I probably only get it out every couple of months if I'm lucky. So if you'd like to receive that, at different events or workshops or things that are happening, I run all different sorts of programs, from Nature Kids programs I've started running recently, which are great fun, tours, and do design work, all different sorts of things. And I've just started doing a blog, so I'm starting to daily put up information about all the different things that are happening in the garden, or different ways that I process food, or different ways that I do permaculture at home. And so that's this one, Our Permaculture Life, at blogspot.com. So I'm just about to kind of launch that. It's up there in a introductory form. So please feel free to come up too and get some cuttings of different things up here. I've got a few things, not a whole lot. And I think there's a cup of tea on.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
So, before we go our ways, I'd just like everyone to acknowledge and thank Morag for a fantastic presentation. We do have a cup of tea up in the area where the DVDs are. I'd like to thank you all for coming along this morning and just remind you that libraries have an amnesty until the 31st of December. So if you bring along some canned foods, we're waiving any overdue fees you might have or any hold fees, and the food goes to food bank for a worthy cause. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Morag.
Thank you.
And please come and have a cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you.